but we had two schools under one contract. It was about 50 million. And in the end, our group, our contract, we saved $2 million on top of
Oof.
our profit pool. So we split 50-50 with the owner. The team got an extra $1 million to use for other things, and the owner got $1 million to use for other things. It's pretty amazing.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Building Scale, specifically the Building Connections series, where I get to talk to awesome people that I meet in my day-to-day life to talk about business, talk about connections, talk about all kinds of ideas that kind of put the spectrum across the board. And my guest today is no exception to that. So much so when we had lunch a couple weeks ago, she'd said, hey, we should just record these conversations because they're always so good. Even if we didn't release them as a podcast, we should just record them because they're chock full of stuff. And I couldn't agree more. So today's guest is Darlene Cadman. She is got 25 years of experience in the construction space, an architect by trade, but is currently a consultant for lean construction activities. She began her career focused on K-12 schools. So when you think of elementary, high school, all that fun stuff, she was doing that, managing large multidisciplinary things across kind of a whole bunch of different complex projects. She led a firm in 2014, Group 2 Architecture, through Alberta's first integrated project delivery, IPD, which is a big part of the conversation today, which is why I mentioned it. She currently is the founder of Weft Strategies, LP, and specializes in the concept of implementing IPD in a contract as well as lean concepts in a construction business. So this is a lot of fun. For me, is the simple way to put it. So I hope you have as good of a time as I did. And with that said, here's the conversation we had. Darlene, it is always amazing to talk to you. I love every time that we interact. It's like we're kindred souls somehow.
I think we are.
And it just, I don't know. I have a ton of fun. I'm always smiling after all our interactions. And I always learn a ton about the construction space, architecture, how things are done, just in general, what you've seen. And I'm hoping that the listeners of the show can get the value that I get. It won't feel the same, but they're going to get the value that I get when we interact.
Well, I get a lot of value out of you too, Justin, because whenever I talk to you, you're the only other person I know who has more productivity ideas than I do about how to get your work done. So I super appreciate all the time that we spend together because you're like, hey, what about that thing? Let's come back to that. You also keep me on track, which I enjoy.
Well, anytime I can be helpful. I actually have a new journal for productivity right in front of me. So yeah, look at that. And
I have this from talking to you last time, which is productivity timer. Reminder, use the productivity timer.
Oh, yeah, that's awesome. So one thing that I had this feeling or vision before we met that like the construction space can just be better. Like it can operate more efficiently. It can have more collaborative contribution further on the front end, more of that than the somewhat of a hierarchy that you see from developer to GC to sub, like all the way down. And then I met you, and then you started explaining what IPD was, and I was like, wait, what? There's a thing that exists already that's like in my brain that I have no idea about. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that and what you've seen work, as well as maybe how you see it work here in the States as well.
Well, for sure. Thanks. So, I've been in this industry now for 25 years. And when I started as an architect, an intern architect, which takes 100 years to become an architect. And we did a lot of design bid build, which is hard bid, as a lot of people know. Not too much design build, and I almost never saw construction management. And so for years and years, I did a lot of work and I was in Canada, a lot of school projects that were design bid build. And so I really got to understand how that particular system works, which, as we all know, it's the race to the lowest bid, and the lowest bid wins. And, I've seen all sorts of things happen. The contractors that put in their bid and they forgot to add in the steel decking into their total, so they're out by $1 million on a school project. Or, this contractor, they went out of business, so they're not going to be there. We've seen it all. And then being on site and all the, this happening.
Yeah.
a lot of going back and forth and trying to hold the line on various things, and just not being more combative than collaborative, right? And it's the way that world is because of the race to the bottom, and it's not set up to be. It's just not set up to be super successful and to have good camaraderie and to develop relationships, not good ones anyways. So, I was meandering along my career path. It is meandering. And about 15 years in, my former boss, Craig Weber from Group 2 Architecture, he's like, hey, we've got this project coming up and we're going to do an IPD. And I'm like, what? What is IPD? He's like, integrated project delivery. And he explained integrated project delivery is where the owner, the architect, and the contractor are in the same contract together at a minimum. So they call that a tri-party. And oftentimes it's a poly-party or a multi-party agreement that includes the rest of the design team, like your engineers, other architects, if you have landscape architect, interior designer. And it can also include the contracting parties, or as they're typically called, subcontractors. We like to call them trade partners.
Yes.
They are involved as well. And what you're looking for in an IPD contract is about 75 to 85% of the value of the project, people who contribute to the value, like mechanical systems, structural systems, being in the contract to work collaboratively together. So these guys all sign the contract together. They work together, and they're contracted to do lean practices, which is an interesting thing because not very many contracts have lean practices in them, although the DBIA does have some contracts that talk about lean practices. And then they're also sharing risk reward. We hear lots about contracts that have penalty clauses, like if you're not done by this date, we're taking money away or we're fining you or whatever it is. But this is a risk reward contract. So in these contracts, everybody's profit is at risk. So everybody jumps in the pool. They're getting paid for their hours, but what they're being paid for is time and overhead only, no profit. And your profit is in a risk pool. And that risk pool it's your carrot, right? It's the thing that you're trying to achieve. If your project budget is $100 million and you go to $101 million, that extra $1 million comes out of your profit pool. And so you are incentivized not only to keep the project on budget, but through lean practices, drive the costs down so that you can increase your profit pool, because that stack of money, which is your direct costs and everything, plus your profit, the line of how much the profit is moves based on where your costs are in construction. So it is a fantastic way of working together, and everybody's incentivized, because who doesn't want to make a profit? I mean, theoretically, architects really do want to make a profit. So it's a really different way of working together. And at the time when my boss said to me, hey, you're going to do this project and it's IPD, I was like, no, I'm not. No, I don't know what I'm doing. You get after being in the industry for 15 years, at that point, I was comfortable with what I was doing. And nobody grows from a place of comfort. We all know that. So there was some rapid growth that had to occur and painful growth that had to occur. But in the end, that first project, which was 2 schools, and these schools were delivered for Red Deer Catholic School District. They are government funded, and they had a specific dollar value, but they also had a very specific area allocation. In Canada, it's meters squared, not feet squared. So it's meters squared that we had to build for a certain dollar value. Now, although you can build it for less, you cannot change the meterage. So the scope, the actual scope of the physical construction of the amount of space, that's not on the table. So you have to work together to figure out how to get this project at or below market cost through innovative practices, lean design, lean delivery. It was an interesting challenge. But we had 2 schools under one contract. It was about $50 million. And in the end, our group, our contract, we saved $2 million on top of our profit pool. So we split 50-50 with the owner. The team got an extra $1 million to use for other things, and the owner got $1 million to use for other things. It's pretty amazing.
That's super awesome. When we talk about collaboration, like that's real collaboration. Like the industry is collaborative. It has to be. It doesn't work. Like you can't build something and not collaborate. Architect, GC,
trade partners, like it has to happen, right?
Yep.
But this, puts the money where your mouth is, essentially saying like, no, we're going to be really, really, really good at collaboration because it's imperative for us to make a profit.
Exactly. And also the type of contract that you have where everybody's in the pool together, so to speak. And there are clauses in the contract. We use the Hanson Bridget a lot. There's another one in Canada under the Canadian Construction Association called the CCDC 30. Mm-hmm. It's okay as a contract as well. A lot of the contractors in the east of Canada use it. In the west, as usual, there's an east-west divide. But in the west, they mostly use the Hanson Bridget contract. And Hanson Bridget is a law firm out of California, actually, who started doing the contracts there on, I call it one of the OG projects, which is Temecula Valley was a healthcare project in California. And so they've been doing their contracts for a while. And in those contracts, though, not only do you have the risk reward and you're all in there together, more interestingly as well is that you indemnify each other. You're choosing not to go after each other. You're choosing to work together, which is amazing.
Indemnify meaning what? Like what does that mean? The collaboration part makes sense, but what is this other piece?
Well, the indemnification part is important because it means that you're choosing not to sue each other. So you're entering into this contract with an agreement.
Generally a good idea when you're trying to partner up with people.
Which is, I know it sounds hilarious. Like it sounds so strange. Like I'm choosing not to sue you, but think about how much our society is litigious, especially in construction. I mean, there are very few in this industry that haven't experienced some sort of litigious or litigation of some sort or another. Mm-hmm. So to enter into a contract where you're agreeing not to sue the other parties is kind of a big deal. I don't how many people have chosen to go into a contract like that, but it's an interesting choice. So not only are you in risk reward, you're choosing not to sue each other. Mm-hmm. And you have to work together in order to bring this budget or the cost of the construction into alignment with the contract. I mean, it's not easy to do. There's a whole process called target value design that you do within lean construction that kind of go hand in hand with it. And that target value design is what you have to work with. It's not just the architects and the designers pulling together this lovely design that is an edifice unto themselves. It's also the trade partners working with you to say, hey, maybe if we did it this way, we could reduce labor, we could have a better install, some of these details might be a little better. So we actually work together to hear both sides of the story as we're progressing, which I find fascinating.
All right. So how does one find the team of players, right? So it sounds like, to your point, there's a lot of litigation that occurs in construction, and there certainly can. So I have to imagine going into a contract with somebody like this, you would want to have a pretty good understanding of them and what you're going to get out of them. If it's design or if it's a specialty trade or whatever it is, you probably want to make sure that this isn't just somebody I found on Google. It'd be my guess.
This is true. So there's actually a really long onboarding interview proposal process. We call it a waterfall system. And so the proposal process often starts with the owner saying, okay, I'm going out for architect and contractor, because the tri-party is always the root of the beginnings. And they either choose to go with the architect first or the contractor first. They don't often do them at the same time. Usually they choose one or the other, and it's whomever you're comfortable with. Some people have a good relationship with their architects or a better relationship with their contractors, but one or the other. And then, so the owner chooses one of those, and then they bring on each party. So if you choose your architect first, now it's the owner and the architect choosing the general contractor. Mm-hmm. And then you add them to it. So now it's the owner, the architect, and the general contractor, and they start choosing the engineers. And then you bring the engineers all on board, and all of that team, including the engineers, then chooses the trade partners. So we do a whole proposal end of things, which is a fairly rigorous proposal. You have to explain your lean methodology. You have to explain your understanding of target value design and delivery. You have to do a RACI. I don't know if you guys know these responsible.
Yep.
The matrix of who's involved in the responsibility matrix. So we do all of those things. But the most intriguing or interesting part to me is the interview process. So once we have it shortlisted to, 3-4 proponents, then they have to interview. And this is no normal interview. This isn't show up, do a PowerPoint presentation and tell me how amazing you are, because you know what? Anybody can do that. And in fact, unfortunately, I had one proponent fairly recently who used AI to answer all the questions that we gave them and then read them to us as their response in the interview, which was torture. So what we do is sometimes we give out the questions ahead of time, sometimes we don't. We usually have about 7 or 8 questions. We give them about 90 minutes, but we dive right into what we call an exercise, and it usually takes about 20 minutes, sometimes a half an hour, depending on how much time we want. And it's a collaborative game, usually. My favorite one is called toxic waste. So
okay.
we get these people in the room. They're usually allowed to bring 4 or 5 people, depending. And we do a toxic waste exercise. So we put a thing up and it says, here's the rules of the game. There is a circle over here and a circle over there. And inside this circle is a bucket, and it has a bunch of tennis balls in it. And the tennis balls represent toxic waste. The bucket is the thing that contains the toxic waste. And the circle is the safe zone. The only time the bucket of toxic waste can touch the ground is when it's in the safe zone. And you can't touch the bucket. You can't get your face over the bucket because the toxic waste will kill you.
Sure.
You can't touch the bucket in any way. By the way, here's some tools. And then they have a whole bunch of bungee cords, a hook, and some clothes pegs. Here's your tools. You have to get the bucket of toxic waste from this safe zone to this safe zone over here. And then you have to dump the tennis balls, which represent the toxic waste, into the bucket in the other safe zone. And you have to do it without dying. And you have 20 minutes. In this 20 minutes, you have 5 minutes or so to plan if you like. And then you start the exercise, and you're not allowed to kill somebody off as a noble cause. Like, I'll sacrifice myself to dump them in the bucket. You can't do that. But if you stick your face over it, you're dead, and now you can no longer participate in the exercise. Or if you touch it with your hand, now you can't use your hand in the exercise, so you're one-handed.
Good reminder for safety training. So, okay.
Right. So they have to figure out how they're going to use the tools, which inevitably means that they use the bungee cords to make this thing that goes over it, and they have the hook, and they lower it, and they hook the bucket and take it over. Inevitably, most of them figure it out. Sometimes they don't. There's the odd limb that gets taken off. Sometimes somebody puts their head over the bucket and dies. But most of the time, they have like probably an 85% success rate. But the really interesting thing is, what we're trying to do is get them to problem solve in a confined amount of time so that we can see who they really are. Because anybody can say, I'm collaborative, I work well with others, all my projects are collaborative, we've worked collaboratively for years and we have it all figured out. But you put somebody in a room where they're trying to get, a project worth several $1 million to their firm, and you give them 20 minutes to do an exercise with a bunch of people, and then you count it down, you're like, oh, you only have 5 minutes left. And they start to get nervous, and they start to and sometimes you will see dictatorships, like, no, I said you're going to do this, you're going to do it this way. Sometimes you see servant leadership where the leader in the room is like, well, what do you think we should do? Well, do we want to consider this? What do you guys think? So you see how people actually act under pressure. And this is how we sort of whittle it down to who's really going to get selected. Whether or not they get the toxic waste dumped into the other bucket is irrelevant. It's how they get there and how they behave on the way. It's really interesting.
So that's awesome. I love all of that. That to me is the ultimate interview experience, right? Like, how do you actually perform in a task that, one, can be very dangerous, right? Toxic waste, right? Very dangerous, but also like there's not a blueprint that you're following. So you have to be creative, and you have a time set, and you have to work as a team, right? So like, that's like the ultimate interview process, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I want to do this now. I need to start interviewing people just simply so I can do this, because this sounds like amazing.
Totally. Especially if you have people that are going to work in teams. You want to see how they actually work.
No, totally. Also, you'd mentioned lean being a core component here. So as I'm thinking through, certainly on the construction side, there's not a ton. It's not the majority, certainly, that are using lean practices, certainly to the extent that can be revolutionary in regards to efficiency. Is that an issue of like, man, like there's just a small pool of companies that can really fit into this bucket just simply because lean hasn't had its tentacles everywhere yet, which I think overarchingly will occur because it just makes sense. But today you have lots of construction companies that are not thinking in a lean manner.
This is true. So one of the things that we do is when IPD first came out, nobody had done it before, right? So we're all newbies. And what that teaches us is that anybody can learn how to do it. That's the reality, right?
Yeah.
So if you have a willingness and you have a drive and you have a certain amount of intelligence, you can figure it out. It's not hard to do. So the reality is if you're interviewing people who may not have started any lean practices in their own work, in their own firm, or in their own companies, it doesn't mean that they can't learn it. And if you're willing to join on a team and put your profit at risk, you're going to learn quickly and you're going to learn well. So it's a willingness really that matters. What I do see though in the industry is regardless of whether it's IPD or design build or CM, or God forbid, even DB, people are starting to use lean in their practices. Contractors are starting to use it more and more in any contract model because there's a certain amount that you can do. And I'm also seeing some architecture and engineering firms like our consultant partners are starting to look at it. Not as much though. They're a little more behind on that, but you can see the ones who use it often. If they're like in the US, they use it a lot on healthcare projects. So if you're an architect and you're in healthcare, especially on the West Coast, where they use a lot of, I think in the States, they usually call it IFOA, integrated form of agreement, or straight up IPD, you find those consultants have used these contracts enough and have had to do lean practices enough that they're now starting to integrate it into their everyday practices in their firm. It's such a benefit. So the reality is you don't have to have it to get these jobs, but you will learn it quickly while you're in it.
Yes, sometimes the best teacher is the fire under your ass.
It is, absolutely, right? The mother of invention, right?
Exactly. So what about lean? Let's just talk about lean just as in generality. Where have you seen a company take on lean practices, and where have you seen the benefits across the board?
Well, let's start with like where it is in IPD projects. So in IPD projects, you're contractually asked to be lean, to use target value design. And so what is that? So first of all, you want everybody in the room working together because we all know there's a benefit to not being siloed in our work. You know, do your work, throw it over the wall and wait for a response. My favorite thing. No, thank you. So if you have the right people in the room at the right time, you have the ability to have conversations that are just different. But you noticed earlier I talked about we don't call subcontractors subcontractors. We don't
trade partners.
Call them trade partners. We also call them consultant partners or something to that effect. So what it really is, lean, and I'm part of the LCI, Lean Construction Institute. Lean is really about respect for people. And our industry is not well known for being respectful to one another for lots of reasons. And if you've ever worked in the contracting, in the construction industry, you've had somebody say, well, that's not how it was when I came through it. Like, there's a certain amount of, I was abused, therefore I'm going to abuse you sort of mentality that sometimes comes to the front. And I mean, it's not just in construction, it's also in engineering and architecture firms. Like, I didn't get any sleep when I was an intern. Why should you? So it really starts with respect for people, and that ideas can come from anywhere. So I have been on projects where some of our best ideas about the design came from an electrical trade partner who said, hey, what if we did this? And we're all like, that is a great idea. Let's try that. So if you start with respect for people, meaning everybody's here, they're doing their best, and they're coming from where they are. Sometimes people have a bad day. Sometimes people have a lot of work on their plate, but they're always trying their best, right? We're all coming to the table with good intentions. So if you start with respect for people and you look in the room and you try to have a certain amount of understanding that everybody's coming to the table to try, that's a good place to start. And then around that, you have the other tenets of lean, or the other ideas, which are to eliminate waste and to maximize value. You're looking for flow, right? Flow over productivity. Have you heard of scheduling? Scheduling, you know, you're talking about, I'm going to be here on this date to do these things, or this is the flow, or this is process of the activities, but people don't talk often about the flow of it, meaning are there stops and start, or does it continue to flow through the process? There's a natural tendency to talk about scheduling, but not a natural tendency to work on flow, which is a different thing.
Interesting.
So, yeah, it is an interesting thing. And of course, I'm all nervous on the podcast and I can't remember the other two principles off the top of my head.
It's fine. Let's dive into flow. So scheduling, I think anybody listening understands scheduling, assuming you're in the AEC space. But what's the difference with flow? Like what's the breakdown? How deep does that get? What does that look like?
Well, flow is really about, people talk about productivity, they talk about scheduling, and there's a tool that is out there called pull planning. Have you heard of pull planning at this point?
No, please enlighten me.
You haven't? Well,
No.
Typically people do what we call push planning. And it is, a great example would be a contractor gets a project and they have been asked while they're bidding the project to develop a schedule. And so they've developed a schedule and maybe they've given a certain amount of detail depending on how detailed their schedule is. It might say, hey, you know what? The steel's going to arrive in December. We're going to be erecting the steel for 2 months and it's going to be topped out at this date. And so they get their schedule together and then they have their whole team together and then they hand them the schedule. And they're like, here you go. And they're like, you're going to be here in December and you're going to be leaving at the end of January and it's all going to work out just fine. But there's no discussion about, well, what is the condition of the site that needs to be in place for you to start the erection of steel on site? Like, and how long is it really going to take you for this much? There's an assumption that the contractor has probably made, like, oh, I've done this kind of a building before, this many million, this many square feet, so it'll probably be about 8 weeks. You know, if that's what they're looking at. So there's a lot of assumptions made in a push schedule and a schedule that's been handed to you. But the most important thing is that there's no discussions, there's no collaboration, there's no back and forth. And in pull planning, really what it is you start from the end. So you start with the end in mind. What's the last thing you do? And then that person says, in order for me to finish this task, I need to have this. So they're pulling or placing a request to the person before them for a condition of their work or a condition of satisfaction in some ways, that the work be like this in order for me to do my piece. So another example might be, I call it two-siding. So the second side of drywall, sometimes you put up the studs, you put up one side of drywall, you've got all your rough ends, but you can't two-side it until certain things are done, which is the rough ends are in and they've been inspected and I know they're inspected and now I can do the two-side, right? So, you know, if you're putting a sticky on the pull plan that says, I'm going to finish two-siding on this date, but what I need from you is confirmation that the rough ends have been inspected. And so you're making sure that the contractor knows that the inspection needs to be done by that date in order for you to do your thing. So it's called pull planning because there's a discussion of what is happening previously. You're pulling that information. And on top of that, that discussion allows people to really understand what you need. Like, have you ever been on a construction site where somebody's like, well, no, I need backing before I can put this in. There's supposed to be backing here. Why isn't there any backing? Did nobody look at the drawings? Like, so the confusion or the question about what the condition needs to be before you can do your work is cleared up in a conversation in pull planning. So when you pull plan, you're starting from the end, you're working to the beginning, you do it in chunks, you don't do it all at once, you might do it a phase at a time, and you're pulling those pieces of information to make sure that all those conditions are met along the way. And it's a very different way of working, and it creates better flow. There's all sorts of intricacies in pull planning about how many people are on site, like what are your resources, how many days does it take? And ideally, once you finish, for example, just a phase pull plan, or that phase could be a small piece of the construction, like area A. So you're finishing area A in this time, you'll be able to do what they call weekly work plans and PPC, as if we don't have enough acronyms in our industry. So
acronyms, that's what makes the world go round.
Especially in our industry, right? Pull planning has sort of 5 levels. The first level, or the highest level, is milestones. What are the big chunks? You know, we're going to finish the design, go in for permits, start construction, top out, all the things, right? Or finishing your site work. There's various milestones. Then you work on the phases and you pull plan those individual phases. And in construction, the phases might be broken down, as I mentioned, into areas of the building. And then from there, you'll be able to pull out a 6-week look ahead. So you'll be able to see, hey, in our pull plan, which is a bunch of stickies on the wall, here's the work that's being done for the next 6 weeks. And you look for any big ticket items, long lead items, whatever it might be. Oh, I've got to get on somebody's butt about getting the inspection ready for this date, whatever it might be. But then you get down to the weekly work plans, WWP for short. And the weekly work plans you do in a stand-up huddle, and you'll be like, hey, this is the work that's going to be done for the next week. Do you have enough resources? What are the constraints? Meaning, what is preventing you from getting the work done this week? You know, I'm waiting for these lights to be delivered, or we don't have that inspection complete, or if it rains this week, I'm screwed. You know, whatever it might be. So what are the constraints to your work? I'm waiting for an RFI to come back. It could be a number of things. So you have a constraint log, you have the work you're doing. And so it's a team's job to try and clear up that constraint log to make sure that the work can get done. And the weekly work plan is granular enough that you can be on site, see what's on the weekly work plan, and look out the window and know that you're on schedule instead of wondering if you're on schedule.
Sure.
Because if your weekly work plans are being met and completed, you're on schedule because the next one flows into the next one. But if you have the old school push plan, which is in somebody's computer because it's never printed out and you can never find it when you need it, you can show up on site and think everything is going along smoothly because you don't know what's not happening. But in a pull plan, you know exactly where you are, you can see it, and you can track it. At the end of the week, they do the PPC because you need more acronyms, and that's plan percent complete. And so at the end of the week, they're like, hey, we had these 25 activities. Oh my gosh, I don't want to do that kind of math. We had these 10 activities. Yeah. We got 6 of them done.
60%.
60%. Is that a good PPC?
No.
No, it's not bad, but it's not great. What if they said we got 10 out of 10 done? We got 100%. Is that a good PPC?
Probably not, because then we're probably playing devil's advocate here, because that probably means that we've undershot what we could achieve, is my guess.
Maybe you could have got ahead of the schedule. Maybe you were sandbagging, right?
Yeah.
That's like an actual thing. Were you sandbagging the schedule? We should have got more done then. Yeah. So if you can get ahead of the schedule, sometimes that's good. Sometimes it's not because the steel can't get ready any faster or whatever it might be. But yeah, you might have been sandbagging. So a good PPC is somewhere around 80, 85%. Yep. Sometimes 75%, somewhere in there. So you track your PPC, you track your variances too. Like, oh, I actually didn't get this done because it really did rain this week. Mm-hmm. And it gives you a really good understanding of what's working well in the project, what's not working well, and it creates flow. Because one thing flows into the next thing, flows into the next thing. And there's not people waiting around, things not happening. The worst thing for any contractor is to have a day on site where nothing's happening because we're all waiting on XYZ. You don't even know what it is, but it's nothing worse than showing up to a site and there's nothing happening.
Yep.
So that's a little bit about flow and pull planning, which is a big part of IPD projects, but not just in construction. We do the same in design.
I feel like that concept, I try to run my life, business and life, this way of like saying like, all right, here's the quarter. I want to get to these 3 goals or these 3 things. And then okay, if I want to get there, what do I need to do backwards? What needs to be achieved in the last month, what needs to be achieved in the second month, and then what needs to be achieved in the first month, and then break that down into weeks and saying like, well, if I want to release 6 articles this quarter, then I need to make sure that I'm putting one out every other weekish. And like, am I on track for that? Have I done a brainstorm, which would be required to then write something the week prior?
Exactly.
And things like that. So for me, that makes perfect sense upon how I think, like how my brain thinks in business, but as well as in life. The normal or the traditional way is the opposite of like saying, we're going to start from, hey, we're here and we're going to build a building. And comparison to saying like, well, if you wanted to build a building that had whatever, or to give the keys to the owner of this new building, what would have to happen right before that. So that's really cool.
Exactly. And one of the things about that that's really interesting is that these deadlines, especially, bigger projects, to me, I did schools for a lot of years. So to me, a big project is between 50 and 100 million. To some people, a big project is $1 billion. Depends what big is to you. Depends on scale. Interesting.
Yes.
So for me, though, you think about some of these bigger projects, it's like, okay, we're going to be moving in 2028. And when you're in design, the owner and the architect and the consultant team, 2028 seems like a long ways away, right?
Mm-hmm.
But to the contractor on a CM job who's in the room there to talk about constructability, they're like, hello, it's not that far, right? And they're talking about it, but sometimes it takes it to be visual for the team to see that schedule and understand the impacts of what they're doing visually, to be able to hold themselves accountable to a schedule. Because that's the other piece, is that not only is pull planning important in terms of the conversations that you're having, but it's important that it be visual. It should be in your face all the time. And it creates accountability, because who the heck wants to sit down in front of the owner, the contractor, and the architect, and you're like, oh, I had these 10 tasks to do this week, but I only did 3. What kind of accountability is that? And I find in our industry, it's kind of the biggest thing that I think we have a challenge on in our industry, is that we are taking on so much work and our resources are heavily loaded for lots of reasons, that accountability is one of the things that slips, I think, the most. I think that people can work harder on respecting one another and even collaborating, but it's that piece of accountability and that level of accountability that really just takes you that much farther. And so in pull planning with weekly work plans and PPC, your accountability is held because it's right there, it's visual, it's explicit, and it's understood. If you consistently don't have enough resources to get the job done, instead of saying, you suck because you're not getting this done, in a respect for people sort of environment, you're like, what can we do to help you out here? Like, do you need more time? Should we hire another team to assist with certain aspects? Is there something that we can do as a team to support you in getting this done, because we're all in it together? That's the IPD way of looking at how to improve and assist with accountability. Isn't that cool?
That's super cool. And I think that kind of speaks to certainly how I see in leaders that I talk to, how they see leadership. If it's a CEO or CFO or CRO, whoever it is, a lot of people have the misconception that means you're the head of that thing, which sure, you are technically the head of that thing, but your job, like your sole job, is just to get other people to be in the best position for them to win and achieve success for whatever you're asking them to do. Like that is it. Like, how do I make your life and job easier so you can achieve what I'm asking you to do, big picture? And it's not me getting into the like, oh, I need to go sell this thing, or, oh, I need to get my hands dirty and do that. It's like, no, as leaders, it's like, how do I just make your life easier? Like, how can I do that? Because then you're going to be able to do way more and be way more productive and have the efficiencies that are there. It's my job as the leader to identify those and then root out those inefficiencies to then make life better for you. And I think that's missed so often. And it sounds like IPD is that.
Yeah, IPD really allows that. And that's one of the things that I think is also a benefit if you're using any sort of lean principles, either in your construction company, your consulting firm, whatever it is. Because in the same example, like the CFO, they're not pushing a schedule, they're pulling a schedule. And sometimes there are people that don't have the skills and don't understand how to break down a big job into little pieces. So if you're asking, how can I help you to get this done? Like, this seems like a really big task. We've got to get this big report out, or whatever it is. How can we break it down and work it into bite-sized pieces? How can we help you to plan that work? Another piece of pull planning that sort of dives into software architecture, and a lot of software companies use it, is Scrum. Have you heard of Scrum? Okay, so pull planning and Scrum go hand in hand, because you think about, if you've got all this work planned out, you've got a 6-week look ahead. There's your backlog, right? And if you've got a backlog, here's your backlog of work. And then you decide, what am I sprinting on this week based on my backlog, and making sure that, you can feed off of it. Instead of just doing 10 tasks, maybe I can do 12, and you can try not to sandbag that work for the week and pull something out of your backlog so you can do a little more. So that Scrum planning really helps you, and you can use that in consulting world and in construction. You can use it anywhere, and it applies. It doesn't matter what contract you're using or what project you're doing. You can use pull planning and Scrum in all of it.
Got it. Where do you think the missing link is for trade partners when it comes to, because historically, especially with a low bid contract, they find that the specialty trades or a trade partner finds themselves at the mercy. There's a lot of the feeling, to these things. How do they break through to find themselves in more of these types of contracts? Like, in comparison to the I'm stuck. Maybe they see a different reality as you see and I see, that we can be doing construction a lot different, but I don't necessarily have the power because I'm not one of your top 3 partners in this thing, even though it could become that, but that tri-partnership of the owner, GC and design team kind of hold a lot more of the power in that scenario.
So, couple of things. There was a lot in that question. Couple of things.
I know.
So you don't have to be in an IPD contract to do lean.
Sure.
And so in America, I'm Canadian, so I always call it America. In America, IPD and IFOA is mostly being done right now in healthcare projects, in data centers, in pharmaceutical manufacturing, those types of projects. So if you are a trade partner, contractor, consultant, and you're doing what I did, which was schools, you're not seeing in the US a lot of IPD projects. In Canada, IPD is being done on a lot of publicly funded projects. Schools, municipalities, federal work, Department of Defense work, like all of it. So if you are a trade partner, a contractor, a consultant, and you're interested in doing your work better, regardless of the contract, because maybe you're not working in these particular niche areas, and you want to work better or do things in a lean way, you have to quit firefighting. You have to learn how to plan your work. My favorite book right now is How Big Things Get Done. And it is about projects don't end badly, they start badly. And I say most, it sounds like it sounds like I'm exaggerating, but I find that most people in their jobs, in the industry are firefighting. They're planning certain aspects of their work, like, oh, we know that these projects are coming out this year, so we're going to go after them. We're going to do proposals for these. Okay, great. But once you get the job, are you planning your work? I know people in our industry. There was a person I used to work with, and I was like, hey, how do you plan your work for the week? And he's like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, how do you know what you've got to get done? He's like, well, I've got all these schedules. There's that word again. And I'm like, yeah, but how do you plan your work for the week? He's like, well, when I get into the office, I open my email and I see what's going on. And I'm like, what? Wait a minute. What do you mean you open your email? He's like, well, I pull out my email and I see what's going on. Like, what are the RFIs? Do I have any change orders? Are there any contracting questions out there? Does the owner need some information? I'm like, okay, so you see what's urgent, right? And like, you do that every day? Yeah. And how long does that take you? Well, sometimes it takes all day to get through that email. Sometimes it only takes a few hours. Sometimes it's a few minutes. I'm like, okay. So when do you plan your work that has to be done that week in order to advance the project to meet the schedule? Well, when I have time. Do you see where I'm going with it?
Oh yeah, I see it totally.
Yeah.
I think people don't structure life, not just business, but like they don't put enough structure in because they have this feeling that like structure takes your freedom away or structure makes things too rigorous. And it's like, no, like structure creates freedom. Structure makes things easier. Structure makes efficiencies happen and make sure that you're not sitting on an email or emails for an entire day instead of like getting your punch list done for whatever it is that needs to occur that week. So that's where I see it. I see a lack of structure for many, many, many people. So what's your take on people essentially not having structure in life, but as well as business?
Well, work structuring is just so huge in what we do, because if you leave the important tasks to when I have time, or for people like me who maybe have ADD and try to procrastinate a lot, you're never really going to get it done, right? Mm-hmm. So if you can't structure your work, you can't be successful. And work structuring and pull planning, and I look at so much of the lean activities and things that you do, and they're really about planning. One of my favorite analogies is like, you don't just paint a wall. Right? You don't just show up with a bucket of paint and start rolling it on. You've got to like take all the cover plates off. You got to, clean all the imperfections. You got to fill the holes. You got to tape it off. It's like plan some more, then paint the wall, right? And you're going to have better success. You can paint the wall without doing all that other planning, but it's going to suck. So work structuring is really a big part of what makes people leaner and planning that work longer term. The other thing that I find interesting about consultants is in work planning, do you have a consistent plan for how you do the work, whether you're a consultant or a contractor? So if you survey 5 different people in a firm, or a construction team, whether they're the partner, the superintendent, an intern architect, from one end to the other, do they have the same description of the process or not? Because if they don't, then there's not enough clarity in the process. Because like you said, if you have good work structuring and good clarity, it frees you. It is freeing because you're not spinning your wheels wondering what to do next. You're not missing information. You're not having to go back and go, oh, I forgot to do this thing, because it's clear. So you're more free with work structuring than you are without it. And it just makes sense when you think about it that way.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I find that a lot of people say we have process, we have processes, but then when you dig into it, it's like, well, you might have processes, but if I ask 5 random people, they all think it's something different. So then therefore your process is broken because you don't have everybody following the same process. Like it just, it in fact makes it like you don't have a process. Even if you do have a documented written down thing, it doesn't matter because it's not actually being lived. And that's the real core component of process that needs to happen. People actually need to follow the process. It's kind of like that joke from Seinfeld where the reservation of the car, it's like, I have a reservation car. He's like, we don't have any more cars. It's like, but I have a reservation. It's like, I see that. He's like, yeah, but I don't think you know what a reservation is. That's the whole point of the reservation, is to hold the car. And if you've not held the car, what's the point of a reservation? So the same thing with process. If I have a process, but nobody follows it, what's the point of having a process?
Exactly. Or have you communicated the process? Because somebody doesn't know what it is, right?
Yep.
Not everybody. You might have a process that 1 or 2 people are following, but if the whole firm's not following it, it's no good.
Correct. 1,000%. I find, I talk about this a lot, the 3 S's of success are strength, structure, and strategy. And if you don't have one of those, you're just, again, you can be successful, but it makes it so much harder and so much more difficult. And you're never going to achieve the level of success that you could is if you had all 3 of those parts. And structure is so crucial to that. So, yeah.
Exactly. Totally true.
So this has been a ton of fun. I've had lots and lots of fun, as I normally do with you. But before we say our goodbyes, what would you like to tell the people before we say goodbye?
Oh, what would I like to tell the people before I leave? One is, it doesn't matter what kind of work you are doing, whether you're a contractor or a consultant or whatever, doing any different contract model, you can do lean. And lean is so versatile. A lot of people use it in their home. Trying to get the kids out the door to get to school. I know people that have used the lean process to pull plan that morning to make sure that they have the most successful day ever. And it works. Lean works for everyone, anywhere, if you can apply it. And what are your 3 S's?
Strength, structure, and strategy.
I'm pretty sure that works in the same way with lean, hand in hand. So what I would say is, if you're interested at all in lean, start to look up LCI, Lean Construction Institute. There's a great blog out there, the Lean Construction blog. That'll help you in the construction industry. And if you're just trying to use it in your daily life, there's this other guy who is amazing and very unusual, Paul Akers and the 2-second lean. Look him up. It's very interesting. But it applies anywhere, and it will change your life.
Okay. And if somebody wanted to get a hold of you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Go to my website, weftstrategies.com, and that's Weft, W-E-F-T. Like weaving. So weftstrategies.com, they can email me there, or they can email me. If you put a link on this, they can email me directly. That's easy.
Yeah, for sure. I will drop it in the show notes for you. No problem there. And I don't know what this is, more just completely random of a question. Which is, a little bit, sometimes you gotta, that's what we gotta take things.
I like it.
So you mentioned productivity hacks. What is your most recent productivity hack that you found that could maybe help somebody?
My favorite productivity hack is Trello. I use a Trello board. Some people use like Monday as another example. And I think it starts with an A. Asana. Yes, that's the other one. And I make myself essentially a Kanban board, which is, I have a backlog, I have a to-do, doing, and done. And some people can use it in a Scrum way of a sprint and how you're getting the work flowed through. But I try to, when I'm on phone calls or talking to people, there's all sorts of to-dos that sort of cascade out of my work. And usually I have 8 million sticky notes on my desk of all these things. or I write them into a list. But now I put them into my Trello board. They become part of my backlog, and they work their way from left to right. And my to-do and doing column, that's where I'm spending most of my time. And then I even have repeat things like invoicing. So I put it in my to-do column the week I need to do it, and then it goes back into my backlog until next time. So create a Trello board or an Asana or a Monday board to track your activities and actually structure your work. It helps.
I love it. I couldn't agree more. I use Asana. I also use a journal. Yeah, no, love both of those options. Well, this has been a ton of fun. I'm going to put all your connection stuff in the show notes there for our listeners. And until next time, adios.
Thank you, Justin. Have a great day. Bye for now.
So that's it. That's this. Where'd you go? There you go. There we go.
Thanks for listening to Building Scale. To help us reach even more people, please share this episode with a friend, a colleague, or on social media.
Remember, the 3 pillars of scaling a business are people, process, and technology.
And our mission is to help the AEC industry protect itself by making technology easy.
So if you think your company's technology pillar could use some improvement, book a call with us to see how we can help maximize your IT and cybersecurity strategy. Just go to buildingscale.net/help.
And until next time,
Keep building scale.
Scale.